at the end of the day, you are also still working with your husband. How do you manage that?
I have to set up super clear boundaries. Okay, I gotta go to his assistant.
One of the reasons I'm so excited to sit down here with you today and share your story with everyone is you are such an amazing activist. You are so empowering. I mean, guys, get ready for these credits because this is insane. I'm going to read them out. Not only are you
I'm going to go over there.
Yeah, you can go over there, like hide in the corner and then come back. You are not only a UN Goodwill Ambassador, you campaign for gender equality across the world, promoting empowerment for women and girls worldwide. You also work with Farm Africa, Conversation International, as a board member on environmental issues. You're co-chair of the European Board for the Global Citizen, and you're also an ambassador for Mother to Mothers and a patron for Storm, a domestic violence charity. And you've also set up your own Elba Hope Foundation. And also this is a great one. You've also awarded the Time 100 Impact Award for your work. Let's just have a massive round of applause for that, because we talk about on this podcast all the time about using your voice, and you are someone who does it time and time again. And I want to know, what made you the game-changing person you are sitting here today? Big question.
First of all, thank you. You hear it all like that. I'm like, how do I have any time?
The CV is packed.
I don't know. The CV is getting pretty packed. But if I want to be remembered for anything, it's for how I've contributed or how I've given back. So the fact that you're even saying that like makes me feel like, oh my gosh, okay, something's right. But it was because of my mom, and I say that a lot, but it's so true because I think back and she was such a vocal person, having grown up in a rural lifestyle, a pastoral lifestyle that she remembered as so beautiful and peaceful, and then watching it kind of fall apart when the civil war happened in Somalia, and then, never being able to go back to what she remembered. She always had this passion to give back to Africa. And she would make us go to food banks to volunteer, at the masjid. I'm a Muslim woman, and we'd be there every Friday, handing things out. She was so passionate about advocacy and giving back. And I mean, she was writing letters to prime ministers before there was social media. She cared so much and still does. And I think I always kind of resisted the fact when people would be like, oh, you're going to be, everyone turns into their mom, or you're going to grow up and be like, I'm totally my mom. I am the person who is writing a letter at Sainsbury's now, okay? I'm passionate about everything, and that is from her.
What kind of conversations did you have with your mum about advocacy, especially when she talked about where she came from and the kind of way that she then ended up having to leave her country, her homeland?
It's so interesting. I didn't have the conversations, really. And I know that's going to sound weird, but my mom was actually trying to protect me so much from some of the stuff that she was going through or facing. And I was actually having a conversation this morning, and I was thinking about it. For instance, I am a huge advocate against FGM. Female genital mutilation. It's quite common in Somalia, but actually happens all around the world. I knew my mom was a victim, but I was, is it the House of Commons, it's called?
Yeah.
Still learning, guys. I've only been here 7 years, not a long time. And I was there advocating and speaking with some of the survivors, and they were talking about the difficulties during childbirth because of what they'd gone through. And I called my mom, and I was like, oh, Mom, some of the people I were talking to had gone through this. And she's like, you don't even know that I almost died giving birth to you. And I just immediately was like, what? These conversations we didn't have because she was trying to protect me. I still fell into, advocating for things that had happened to her because I think subconsciously what I was doing was trying to create a better world for the little girl that my mom was without even knowing it. And, kind of knowing it because I knew that she'd been through these things. But it's so hard to have these conversations with your parents. They're emotional ones. And, man, I cannot tell you that day. I was just I just want to do so much more. I can do more. It's not enough. And there's so many people like her who just suffer in silence because they have to be or need to be powerful because the world doesn't give them a leg up, And my mom is a massive inspiration in my life, if you can't tell.
But it's also amazing when you kind of grow as an adult, you start to have those more important conversations with your parents, don't you? And it's such a powerful thing when you actually stop necessarily becoming the child in a way and you become almost like their equal and you're like, oh, wow, you've lived a life.
Yeah, totally. But then you realize they also never stop parenting.
Yeah, never.
And I'm like, I can make my own breakfast. Thank you. Don't knock on my door at 7. But you're so right. I think she's shaped my whole world. And the woman I've become now is because of the sacrifices that she gave for us. And I remember this conversation I had with my mom, way back, and I know I'm, getting distracted now, but it's just reminding me of this conversation we had. She was like getting at me for not wanting to write this op-ed, because I was like, why does anyone care? Why am I writing this op-ed? Like, they just always going to say like Idris Elba's wife or whatever. And she she wanted to slap me. Like, so how upset she was. And she was like, do you not understand how privileged you are? How privileged you are to be able to talk to anyone and share anything? That's such a privilege to be able to use your voice. Like, don't ever think you shouldn't. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks. And that kind of like brought me to my senses a bit, because I think she's so right. And sharing information and sharing opinion, I mean, that's the core of advocacy. It's if you can make it in the room, you're 50% of the job done. You need to show up. And that's just resonated with me.
That's so powerful. And you always continuously, through your work, campaign for people who can't necessarily show up for themselves or have their voices quieted. Have you ever felt that your voice is being quieted in your life?
Oh, interesting. I mean, look, I'm a Black Muslim woman, so yeah. But I think when I say that in interviews, because people have asked me, oh, you're here speaking, I'm always like, I always make sure to say I'm here speaking with, because I never like the idea of someone standing this kind of, we see this savior type model annoyingly a lot, speaking for. I think it's so important to speak with people, and take other people's perspectives and considerations and life experiences on that stage with you, because we're never just speaking for ourselves. We're speaking for each other. And I try and think about the times that I do speak out for myself that way. So if anyone ever does try and like squash my opinion, I'm like, I've got the whole world behind me, okay? Like, I'm not the only one that thinks this. And I think it gives you this kind of like power to speak up.
Yeah, and you do continuously talk about gender bias in your work. When do you think you first kind of realized there was a gender bias and a racial bias in our world? Was there like an awakening moment where you're like, whoa, this world isn't necessarily built for my voice?
Yeah. I noticed it obviously when I was younger, as we all do. Like, who just watched Barbie? Did you guys watch Barbie? We live in the patriarchy.
Yes.
I know. I actually was kind of sad leaving Barbie. I was happy, but I was like, that is so true, But and obviously, so in that sense, of course, we've experienced it in life. But I remember, when we were going up for the UN ambassador roles, they kept saying, oh, this is the first time that there's an African doing it, and the first time. And I just remember kept thinking, like, so you've been doing this for Africans for how long, and there haven't been African voices representing the Africans? Like, I was just like, that's so ridiculous to me. And anytime I hear, oh, you're the first African couple on Vogue, I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
Like, me? Like, are you kidding now? What year are we in? So I kind of hate, and Idris is probably the same school of thought. We did this campaign together recently. We kind of say, don't tell us we're the first. We don't want to know. It doesn't matter. Like, let's just keep trucking and not try and celebrate or do anything performative around that, because it should be the norm.
Yeah. Do you find that very frustrating then, in that sense?
Yeah, I think so. And it's funny because it's something that probably should be, you would think, oh my God, that's so exciting. You should celebrate. Yeah. But if you really think about it, well, what does it say about where we're at in this world? If it's like this massive gasp moment if two Africans are on the cover of something. Like, okay, well, we are. That's great. And I think we kind of try and take that. I just started a production company, which I'm so excited about. And it's called Pink Towel. There's no fancy reason for the name. It's just there was a pink towel on the kitchen counter.
And you were like, great name.
I couldn't think of anything.
Stunning towel, great name.
But I wanted to see and create and curate stories that just normalized the experiences of minorities. Like, it wasn't going to be a trauma thing or trauma porn. It's just going to be normal, boring stories. Not boring, because hopefully they do well, but like, you know what I mean, right? And I think that that's something that's missing in the world. If we look at movies around the Black experience, they're so filled with trauma. And it's like, okay, we get it, and it's important these stories are told, but can we level it out and balance it out with some stories around positivity? And I feel like that, especially around the activism that I do, because I grew up watching those Save the Children ads, like all of us, and I'm East African and got called like a hungry Ethiopian. I'm not even Ethiopian, in high school. And I was like, you need to see people who represent where you want to be. You need to see, your positive stories about where you're from. Those are just as important. So trying to level that out a bit.
Yeah. That's why representation is so important and it's so powerful. We need to tell so many different stories and not just take it from just like one viewpoint all the time. And we're so guilty
So
about doing that as a
important.
society.
Yeah, and it's all the time, and it's like it's cyclical. It just comes back. There's like this like really great moment of, you know, new stories and new things, and then like it's like the world. It's like a pendulum instead of, you know, and it just swings back in the other direction. And you know, I don't know if the world will ever find itself in this nice balance rather than this pendulum type thing, but it tends to happen like that. So we just need to keep reminding ourselves of how important representation is.
You continuously go out and you meet rural women and girls across the world who are so directly impacted by the climate crisis we are currently facing. And it's very easy for us to sit here in this room now and just be like, oh, it's fine, it's not really affecting us. But it is directly affecting people right here, right now in the world that we live in. And you can even see it on the news if you turn it on right now, right?
Yeah.
From your work and going out and meeting these rural women, what stories really stick with you? Because through your work, you're saying that gender is greatly, directly linked to climate crisis, isn't it, and climate change?
Yeah, I mean, I never would have thought working in agriculture would have opened my eyes to like conversations around climate or conversations around gender, but it's so interconnected. I mean, when you think about the majority of the global south having to sort of live and depend on the land that they live on and feed off the land that they live on, like food security comes directly from your backyard. You know, you have conversations around the barriers that women face if they make up the majority of the informal markets, but they don't have land rights to be able to grow the crops they want to grow. I mean, there's also cultural sensitivities. There's, you know, programs that are being started up, but we're like ages back. And then on top of all of that, they have to figure out if they can even grow anything next month because the weather's different than it was for the past 20 years. I mean, it's so present when you're in the areas that we visit, like in the rural areas in the global south. It is so, so present. There is no denying climate change is here. It's not something that's like 5 years down the road. I mean, there's a word for it in every language, you know, and that in every armpit in the world, like, and I mean that by like saying like somewhere super far away or something, right? Like somewhere you wouldn't even think of, every little crevice. There's an understanding that something needs to happen. And I think that's why recently we've shifted our focus to looking at adaptation, because you can give and give and give to a community, but if they haven't, you know, and it actually reminds me of a conversation I was having with the CEO lately, and he's like, oh, I heard you do work in agriculture, and, you know, just so you know, we pay fair wages across the board to all of the rural people who help supply goods for us. And I said, okay, well, what do you do towards the adaptation in those communities? Because it only takes one climate crisis, a flood, something that your wage doesn't matter. You've got nothing, you know? And in Somalia, for instance, there's one of the worst, I think the worst famine that's ever happened. The government won't even call it a famine. And for a country of herders, if you have a catastrophe or a drought or something, you sell your livestock, you have nothing. Like literally nothing. I think people forget that if you're not building resources and infrastructure and ways for people to adapt to what's coming, which is already here, you're setting them up for failure. And then we hear, oh, there's another famine, there's another drought. Well, of course there is, because you can't just put a Band-Aid on the problem. You can't just throw money at the situation, which, by the way, it's not to say that aid isn't needed, because, you know, a hurricane happens, immediate relief is needed, but what are we doing to prevent it from happening in the future? And I think it's so easy for, you know, politicians to say, oh, we've done this and have donated this much, or, you know, we've supplied this much food and resources. All right, well, the conversation needs to be one that's continuous.
But what you're saying is so important, because we talk about activism all the time. We talk about using your voice, but using your voice also has to come with listening. You have to listen to people, and I think that's a skill that we completely neglect in our society, 100%. We do not listen to the people like are on the ground. What have you learned about the power of listening through being an activist and through your work?
It's so important, because you're forever learning. And if you're not learning, you're doing something wrong, because every story is so different. Like, I mean, you think you understand fertilizer, for instance, and then you go to another conversation, you're like, we would never use that, or like, you're constantly learning. Like, I'm even going back to school, because I still feel like I'm in these rooms that don't even know enough. Like, there's so much to learn. Education is so important, because we get that from listening to other people, but we found ourselves in this world where we kind of cancel other voices out if they don't fit into our echo chamber. So we find ourselves not learning, I think. And I worry about things like that with like my younger siblings. I'm always thinking they're so scared to say anything now. And you know, some people will call it like oh, they're just being so politically correct or whatever. They don't. And I'm like, but actually, there's kind of like a box you put yourself in when you do that, because I'd rather make a mistake and someone create a safe space for me to make that mistake in than for me to not say anything at all. I think listening to each other is so important.
It's so important. And it's also realizing we all have a platform.
Yeah.
Like, you could have like 10 followers, you could have no followers, you might not even have a social media, but you can influence people in your life every single day by the conversations
if my mom was
you
here,
have.
she would tell you 10 is a privilege.
Yeah.
10 is a privilege.
It totally is. But if there's someone sitting here today or listening to this who thinks, do you know what, my voice isn't, like, I don't have any power in my voice, I shouldn't use my voice, I'm scared about using my voice, what would you want to say to them?
Snap out of it.
Yes.
Because that is so not true. I mean, if you think about all of the people who, this is a very poor example, but like, look at a conspiracy theory, for instance. It only takes one person to say that we're all gonna, turn into zombies, and then another person gets like infected by that misinformation. And like, words are so powerful. Send out that tweet, put that post up. Don't be afraid, because just trust that the community that you have built around you and the friends that you have in your life will tell you, hey, have you thought about this side of it? Or have you looked at that? And then be willing to change and learn and listen and adapt. And that should be how life is. And I feel like we used to be like that, and now it's kind of that. I don't know.
It's just
harder.
Very noisy on either side of the argument, hasn't it? Which makes everyone so scared to use their voice.
But there's room for all the voices. I think there are, because it should be this moving, growing thing that's, create spaces to listen and talk at the same time.
And you're not just creating change on a global scale with your activism, you are also creating change in the beauty industry as well. Yes, you are. With Sable Labs, the skin...
Shout out to the team who's here.
The team over there. Now, you created this with your husband, Idris Elba, and it's for all skin types, which is amazing, which is still so rare in the beauty industry, and I can't believe we're still having to have these conversations about inclusive beauty brands, but here we are, 2023. What gave you the idea for it? Where did it all come from?
Yeah. If I really think back, and this is probably the product of having talked about it quite a bit now, I'm like, oh my God, I was like an angry teenager about beauty. Like, I was like watching all of these Neutrogena ads and whatever, and I had like really bad teenage acne, which is fine, but the way I was dealing with it was like burning my face off. And my mom's telling me, stop using that, and I didn't care. I was like, I want everything. But I was buying into a lot of these brands that didn't care about me. And when I say that is, melanin-rich skin suffers from generally post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, for instance. And then I'm buying into a brand that's just drying out my skin even further and creating a breeding ground for inflammation, and it just gets worse. And the reason I was doing it was because all of the black brands, let's call them, were in like the last stronghold of segregation in the US. Like, if you go to a Walmart or a Target in the US, there's a black aisle. I think that's the case here. I think if you go to Boots, there's like black hair care in a separate aisle. Like, wait, what? That doesn't even make sense. Like, the funny thing is, melanin-rich skin is actually quite bougie. We like more moisture, we need better products, better quality ingredients. That's great for everyone. So if a brand is going to cheap out and remove things like niacinamide, which everyone loves and knows now, for a lower price point, they're doing everyone a disservice, let alone people with melanin-rich skin. And it was that realization of like, oh, there's nothing in the market that I felt that I could buy into, because my friends had all this cool stuff on their bathroom counter. I wanted cool stuff on mine. There's nothing that felt like that. And I was like, I want to create products that, my younger self would be like, oh, this is cool. I want to have this on my shelf. And guess what? It caters to everything that my skin needs and is also better for everyone else's. So it was this feeling of like this injustice and this responsibility I kind of grew to create something that was like that. But then the funniest thing happened. I'm thinking I've created like this thing in this white space. No one's done this. But no, we became a celebrity brand. And we got lumped into this oversaturated category. And I was like, what?
How did you feel about that labeling of your product?
It was so frustrating, because when we were developing, and like, let's be honest, it was like every week. It was like every day. And then there'd be someone else saying, oh, I've created a brand. And I was like, did we all think of this at the same time? Like, was it like Anna's water at the Met Gala that she gave us that we were all like, we're going to put out a beauty brand? Like,
That
it was
was
so
powerful
weird.
at the Met Gala, clearly.
Right? What are they serving us? I don't know. And it was just so funny, but it was frustrating because we felt like the formulations lost their credibility in a sense. And you know, we worked our bums off. Like the fact that Idris knows what tranexamic acid is, it took work. Okay? It took work. And we go to the chemist with these amazing formulations. Like we didn't white label. There's no investment. We are a family-run business. Do not call us a celebrity brand because we did this because we care. And to call it that felt like it was taking away the passion.
At the end of the day, you are also still working with your husband. Now, I love my boyfriend, but I don't think we could ever set up a brand together because I think it would cause World War X. How do you manage that?
Do I? No, I'm just kidding. You know, I've said this before. I have to set up super clear boundaries. Okay, I gotta go to his assistant.
How's that feel to have to go to your
Not
husband's
nice.
assistant?
Not nice. But you know what? I get it because it's not like at midnight when we're cuddling in bed. I can be like, you know that work email that came in an hour ago? No, we've got to set parameters and boundaries. Work is work. If I want to plan a date night, I can do it through him. If I want to plan work. And you know what? Now he comes through my assistant too. So it's all good.
Yeah.
I've got one now too.
It works both
like
ways.
that. It works both ways, exactly. Maybe that's the answer. You guys want to work together. You just need good PAs.
Tom, get a PA. We'll work towards that goal. And I think it was so amazing that you stand for in creating this company with your husband is that you stand for an amazing, empowering couple who empower each other as individuals.
Oh.
And that is what's so amazing about a positive relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that what you've learned? Have you learned that a positive relationship is empowering each other to become the best person you can be?
I love that. We should have used that as a tagline for our podcast.
Trademarking.
Writing it down. No, so we started this podcast called Coupledom because for that very reason, we cared so much about the importance of community and partnerships. And it wasn't just about romantic couples. It was like family and business and best friends and two people in life who were just getting through it together and empowering each other to create this amazing moment, amazing business, amazing, you know, whatever. And we found it fascinating. Like we soaked that stuff up. I wanted to say shit again. And now I just said it again anyways. But
You can swear. This is a swear
okay, good.
podcast.
Okay, good.
Don't worry.
Because we were newlyweds and like, oh my God, stuck together during COVID. So you know how that was for a lot of couples, right? It was make or break. So we were like, let's talk to some people.
Let's maybe reach out to some other people.
Yeah, you know, let's see how they're doing it. That's okay. Funny enough, the consistent thread in all those conversations was about self-love. You need to have this relationship with yourself that is a good one before you can talk to anyone else or have a relationship with anyone else. And it was part of the reason we started Sable Labs as well, because we realized that self-care needed to become selfless.
Yeah. And I think through everything you've spoken about today, kind of the root of everything you do, correct me if I'm wrong, is it family? Is family the thing that inspires you? Because you've come from Somali heritage and family is such a big thing and it's such a specific version of family.
Oh my God.
And now you're creating a blended family as well. Like, how important is family to you? Is it the bedrock of everything?
You made me cry. I love family. Come join my family. No, I'm so Canadian like that. We're just one big family, you know? Like, it's all I talk about. Like, I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and they're the cutest, sweetest people. Like, they would probably hate that I called them cute, but they're just so, like, I love the idea of family. And I think it's also part of just, you know, being East African. We just have a lot of kids generally. So I have like 150 cousins and, you know, family to share with everyone. I love community.